So we're looking today at the second chapter of True Christian Religion, and the title of the chapter is The Lord, the Redeemer. And what I want to do today is start at the end. If you remember last time, Swedenborg addresses a couple of misconceptions, a couple of false ideas, and here he doesn't mince his words, but he puts it at the end, and I'm starting here today. So this is the first thing that he says. Redemption and the passion on the cross must be thought of as two distinct events. And he continues, otherwise men's minds will ground like a ship on sandbanks or rocks and sink, steersman, captain, crew and all. That is to say, it will go astray in all matters which concern salvation from the Lord. It is a fundamental error to believe that the passion on the cross was the real act of redemption. That error, together with the erroneous belief in three divine persons existing from eternity, has so perverted the whole church that there is no remainder of spirituality left in it. So I really struggled with what I was going to call today, and I'm really still not sure. I thought of all sorts of things. That error has perverted the whole church. Or someone suggested on Thursday, perhaps we should call it, For God So Hated the World. Someone else also suggested we call it, Well, Who's Got Your Back? And then I wondered about what can God not do? And I wonder what you think we should call today. I'll leave that to you to think about. So here's the question to consider. Do we need to be redeemed? Why is redemption necessary in the first place? So if you remember last time, we talked about the love that rules the universe. We saw that the nature of God is love. But that love is also the purpose and order in which creation has been created. So everything must conform with that order, with love. So Swedenborg writes this: it is a law of order that insofar as a person approaches and comes near to God, which he should do entirely as if of himself, so far does God approach and come near to him, and link himself to the person in his midst. And if you were to sum it up in a very common saying today, it's birds of a feather flock together. That's the order of life. That's the order of creation. In order to be with God, we must become like him in some way. We must become expressions of love. It's as simple as that. Now, the thing is that over time, mankind has drifted away from that principle. We've drifted away from the principle of love. We've drifted towards worldly and selfish desires instead. So Swedenborg wrote this: when the Lord came into the world, the whole globe had utterly alienated itself from God by the worship of idols and the practice of magic. And the church established among the children of Israel, and at a later period among the Jews, had been totally destroyed by falsifying and adulterating the word. So, the world has been created with the purpose of love. We have drifted away from that to the love of self rather than the love of others. And this is the reason this redemption needs to take place. And we find ourselves stuck. You see, in order to become an expression of love, you need to want to become an expression of love. And no one wants to. At least this is what we're saying at the time that Jesus came into the world. No one wanted to become an expression of love. And so where were we heading? Well, we're all heading to hell. So it requires the Lord to take some action. Now, there's another problem. And the problem is that the divine essence, as it is in itself, intrinsically can't do anything about it either. Swedenborg writes this: Jehovah God, as he is, in his infinite essence, cannot approach hell, much less enter it, since he exists at the purest and first level. So God is love. He can't approach hell, because if you've read any of Swedenborg's accounts of heaven and hell, the idea of evil spirits wanting to get into heaven, they're allowed to go, but then what happens to them? Well, they're there writhing on the ground in pain and agony because they can't stand being in heaven. So what happens if God approaches hell? Well, what happens then is God brings that pain and suffering to those people in that condition. So the Lord can't do that without causing pain and suffering, as he is in himself. God cannot contradict himself. And God doesn't violate that order. So he needs to take on another nature which is not in itself divine in order to approach hell, in order to be able to set it right. So he takes on this humanity and he develops and advances in this humanity in the same way that we do. Here is something else Swedenborg writes. Divine order requires that a person should adjust himself to receive God and prepare himself as a receiver and dwelling place for God to enter into and live as in his temple. This a person must do of himself while still acknowledging that it is from God. Every person must and will advance in accordance with this order if he is to become spiritual instead of natural. The Lord advanced in the same way in order to make his natural human divine. So in order to overcome this problem, the Lord took on this human nature, which is fundamentally not divine, and made it divine. He followed the same process of growth that we have to follow in our spiritual lives. And that's the picture that Swedenborg presents. Now, he also talks about divine truth a great deal. And I just want to share some insights about that, because that's really what I want to focus on today. The reason Jehovah God came down into the world as divine truth was so that he could effect redemption. Redemption was the conquest of the hells, the ordering of the heavens, and afterwards the establishment of a church. To achieve these aims, the divine good is not powerful enough, but the divine truth coming from the divine good is. Now you just have to understand this idea of the divine good is the essence of God. That's that aspect of the Lord which is something we can't appreciate and we can't approach. But the divine truth is something we can grasp and have a better idea of. And I just want to explore this idea a bit, give you a sense of what's going on. So these two terms, divine good and divine truth. Now he often uses a couple of different terms when he's speaking about these kind of two sides of the coin. Truth and good, obviously, but then also love and wisdom. He also talks about charity and faith. He talks about will and understanding. And he also often, and I've already done it myself, used this word order. Now what we tend to do is we tend to contrast these two things. Okay, so we think about good and truth as entirely separate things. And sometimes we think of them as opposing things. So for example, truth is cold and hard. There's a story of the woman caught in adultery, and the people who bring this woman to the Lord, they pick up stones to stone her, to kill. That's representative of truth. Truth is cold and hard. Good, on the other hand, is warm and soft and fluid. And one of the images we use in the word to represent good is oil. It's fundamentally different to the cold, hard stone of truth. Now, order is an interesting one, because we think when we talk in terms of order, it's It's setting everything neatly in a row, and it's making sure everything's in its right place. And we think of it in terms of truth and principles and ideals. But in actual fact, order springs from the nature of love. And what we need to realise is that in actual fact, instead of being opposing principles, the reality is that good is the heart of truth. And truth is the expression of what is good. So instead of thinking them, holding them separately and keeping them apart, we have to realise they're actually one and the same. That one is an expression of the other. And what the Lord did in his life in the world is to re-establish the connection between these two. So just hold that idea for a moment, okay? That truth is the expression of what is good. And as we read this now from Arcana Celestia, I'm going to go a sentence at a time. Divine truth is the order itself of his kingdom existing everywhere, all the laws of which are truths or eternal verities. But then he says, divine good is the very essential of order, every aspect of which is an expression of mercy. You see how those two, they come together. And then he says both of these, divine good and divine truth, are attributed to the Lord. If solely divine truth were his, no mortal man could be saved, for truths condemn everyone to hell. The reality of our lives is that if we were left to ourselves, we would be selfish, worldly beings. That is the reality that the Lord understands about us. So if he were to judge us according to truth on its own, our existence is a hellish one. But divine good, which is the essence of mercy, raises people up from hell towards heaven. So what the Lord did in his life on earth was to re-establish connections. And that's what I really want to focus on, is this idea of connection. And I want to think about what are the lessons that we can learn from this chapter and from the Lord's life. Well, I think the first thing for me is, as a church, we need to be about making connections, not breaking them. Luke chapter 15, I have to say, has to be one of my favourite chapters. Those three parables, and especially the first one, the parable of the lost sheep, one of my favourite passages in the Word. And right at the beginning it says, the Pharisees and scribes complained, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." Jesus was about making connections. He wasn't really interested in the people who thought they were good enough. He was interested in the people who knew that they weren't. The parable itself, that lovely parable of the lost sheep, describes what Jesus does. It describes his entire life, to go where the lost sheep is and to carry it home. That is exactly what the Lord did. He came into our world, he lived the life that we live, and in so doing he re-established the connection that allows us then to find our way back into heaven. The Apostle Paul talks about speaking the truth in love. I don't know whether you've heard that phrase, speaking the truth in love. And what it means is we don't shy away from saying what needs to be said. If someone's doing something wrong, you tell them they're doing something wrong. But the really important thing is why you do it. Are you doing that to criticise them, to make yourself look or feel better than you are? Or are you doing it out of concern for that person? Are you trying to help them move towards a more heavenly life? And John chapter 8, I've already mentioned the woman caught in adultery. Jesus did not let her off the hook. He didn't say, oh no, they're there, it's all right, you just go back and do what you've always been doing, that's fine. He said, go and sin no more. But he didn't condemn her to death, as the scribes and the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, the Jews, had condemned her to death. The Lord is about making connections, and he's connecting with people so he can save them. And that's what we need to be about. Again, John's Gospel, chapter 17, he says this, he's talking about the disciples, and he says, they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. So there's this contrast between not of the world, but sent into the world, the connection that has to happen there. So many times I've heard stories, and I heard of one this week, of a child goes off the rails, teenagers in their rebellions and things and all sorts of things that go on. A child goes off the rails, and how do mum and dad respond to that problem? Too many times the response is, I'll throw you out of the home. That has to be the worst thing you can possibly do, because you cannot be a positive influence in the life of anybody if you are not present in their life. You see, making a connection. Being a part of the church is not an easy thing to do. To follow the Lord's example is not an easy thing to do. We need to be making connections with people with whom we disagree, people with whom we struggle, people whose behaviour we do not approve of, because that is the only way we have any influence over them. Now, I just also want to mention the word. A couple of weeks ago, someone was talking to me and saying, why can't the word be written in plain spiritual truth so that there's no argy-bargy about it, there's no, it could mean this, it could mean that, we translate it different ways and we come up with all sorts of different answers and understandings and doctrines. Why can't the word just be given to us exactly as divine truth? And I was reading Apocalypse Explained, and I found Swedenborg's response to that idea. So just bear with me as I read this. I know that some will wonder why waters are mentioned in the word and not the truths of faith, since the word is to teach man about his spiritual life, and since if the expression the truths of faith had been used instead of waters, man would have known that the waters of baptism and of washing contribute nothing to the purifying of man from evils and falsities. But it is to be known that the word, in order to be divine and at the same time useful to heaven and the church, must be wholly natural in the letter. For if it were not natural in the letter, there could be no conjunction of heaven with the church by means of it. There's that connection again, conjunction of heaven with the church by means of it. For it would be like a house without a foundation and like a soul without a body. So there's got to be this natural expression of the word. We've got to have the word in the letter as it appears to make connection with it. And the best way I can illustrate that is just ask you, have you ever thought that Swedenborg was difficult to understand? Yeah, I bet you have. I bet you have, especially if you've come across Swedenborg for the first time. Is Swedenborg difficult to understand? Boy, oh boy, he is. Because he talks in terms of truths of faith and, the goods of charity and da-da-da. And you wonder what on earth it all means. Now, the thing is, he's trying to show us something about the internal sense of the word. But we don't get it. We don't get it. We need something a bit more down to earth, a bit more earthy, a bit more kind of real, that we can touch and we can see. And Jesus said this, if I've told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? And again, one of the other Gospels, Matthew's Gospel, the disciples came to him and said, why do you speak to them in parables? He answered and said to them, because it has been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. You see, the Word connects with us where we are. In a sense, you're never going to understand the Word as the Lord understands it. It's not going to happen. But you are going to understand the Word in some way. And the fact that you understand it in some way is what establishes the connection with the Lord. And that's why we have those pretty little stories or earthly stories in the Word that you can connect with. You can understand about a man throwing seed on the ground. You can understand about a lost sheep. You can understand about a lost coin. And that's enough. That's all you need to understand to begin with, to make the connection. And that's what the Lord is trying to do. So look, I'm just going to urge you, as you consider what we do as a church and as you consider the Lord's place in your life, understand the importance of connection. Connection, that's all it is. It's very, very simple. If we can connect, so many things fall into place.